Hello, beautiful people. It's Shakima stopping in for today's live podcast. For today's discussion, we'll be talking about spiritual awakenings and how they manifest as psychosis or psychotic episodes. So I hope that you guys are able to appreciate and enjoy my viewpoint. It is a little bit different to perhaps what you may have seen or experienced, and I'm just going to go ahead and get straight into it. So stay tuned, and I hope you guys enjoy as much as I enjoy giving you guys an opportunity to come into my world and see things from my viewpoint and perspective, and hopefully we'll be able to have an open dialogue about it. Right, guys, so for today's episode, I really felt compelled to discuss spiritual awakenings and how they manifest as psychotic episodes. And it's not something that is generally discussed. It's something that is very much a taboo subject in society. I think in most cases, when we see someone going through psychosis or a psychotic episode, it's easy for us to sort of say they're crazy. And that's not necessarily the case. I think if we take an opportunity to really understand the inner workings of psychosis and what happens within the mind when somebody is experiencing a psychotic episode, it would make it a little bit easier for people to navigate their way through their psychotic episode, as it's sort of told. And we could also be a companion for them on the journey. So, what is psychosis? To me personally, from my own personal experiences. Hey, beautiful ladies, Jennifer and Vicky. Welcome to the space. Thank you guys for joining in. When I think of psychosis, I think of literally just people going through an awakening. That's how I potentially sort of look at the situation. A lot of the times we don't know what's lying beneath the surface of our mind's consciousness. And if we're not aware of what's going on within our subconscious mind, when we go through a spiritual awakening, it can actually show up as psychosis. It can even look like psychotic episodes in between spaces of time. So we may be fine 1 minute, and the next minute we may be not so fine. But it really is just a case of us understanding that when we're going through a process of activating our chakras, it may show up as psychosis because there are shadows within our chakras. There are, I guess, darkness that we carry around as traumas, as part of our experiences, and we aren't necessarily consciously aware of these things. And because of the fact that we're not conscious to them, they can show up as psychotic episodes when we're sort of going through whatever stages of life. One thing in particular that I do want to speak about is a Kundalini awakening. If that's a new word in the room, so Kundalini is the life force energy that lies in some cases dormant throughout our lifetime until it's actually sort of triggered. And it can, it's the life force energy that strolls up and down our spine when we go through a spiritual awakening. So it's actually triggering all of our chakras all at once. So if there are any, I guess, shadows that we're carrying, if there's any traumas that we're carrying within each of any of the chakras as we go through a Kundalini awakening, it may show up as psychosis. And it's interesting because I spoke to someone recently who went through a Kundalini awakening, and, he said to me, I don't understand why anybody would want to do this voluntarily, because I spoke to him about a meditation that can be done to activate the Kundalini consciously, which is something that we should probably practice doing to avoid our spiritual awakenings showing up as psychosis. In most cases, when we speak about a Kundalini awakening, for some people, it can show up as a negative because there's parts of ourselves that we choose not to acknowledge. There's parts of ourselves that we choose not to share with society. Those are the things that we call the shadows. Those are the the parts of ourselves that we hide. In most cases, those are the things that we hide, sometimes even from ourselves, and they are personalities or aspects of our personality and characters that lies within our subconscious mind, and they create sub personalities within our subconscious mind. So if we don't necessarily understand what aspect of ourself is manifesting through us, it can, again, like I mentioned, show up as psychosis. Doesn't mean we're crazy, guys. I've probably gone through navigating my way through at least, I want to say, 5 or 6 psychotic episodes over the course of the last 6 to 8 weekends. Every weekend, because of the moon charges. So one thing I do want to put across to people, when we go through spiritual awakenings, it usually has a lot to do with the astrological alignment. So there are certain forces within the universe, there are certain energies within the universe that is triggering our awakening. It's kind of encouraging us to awaken to those parts of ourselves that we choose not to acknowledge. Now, if we can actually go through a process of sitting within those aspects and reflections of ourselves, we can actually become a little bit more aware of who we are. Now, for a lot of us, when we go through psychotic episodes, I have to be very blunt, and I have to sort of be very open in terms of the dialogue that I use in this space, just so that I can take an opportunity to give you guys an insight into the way that I personally sort of perceive the perspective when we're speaking about psychosis. So we have traumas that we experience, and they lie dormant within ourselves as things that we consider to be our demons, our shadows. When I hear the word demons, I think of the lower vibrational reflections of ourselves. They are lower vibrational spirits that we carry within ourselves that have been subjected to pain at some point in our lifetime. And a lot of the times, for some people, it isn't necessarily just trauma that we experience in this particular lifetime. It's also trauma that we are trying to process from past lives as well. And those are some of the things that may make it seem very far-fetched for people to be able to understand. Those are the things that may make it very difficult for people outside of us to be able to relate to our current experience, because as they see us in our experience today, that's the only version of us that they know. And to us consciously as well, that's the only version of ourselves that we know consciously, because we're not taking enough time to sit with ourselves, to go within our subconscious mind, to tap into these past lifetimes and the experiences that we've had in these spaces of time as well. Now, considering that time is subsequently happening all at once, and we are literally experiencing different dimensions of time, which is pretty much different pockets, different degrees of space. And the way that we're able to interpret these experiences is through our conscious mind. Now, if somebody is unaware of their own personal experiences, or they've shut themselves off, basically something's happened, let's say when they were 2 or 3 years old, and they shut themselves down to that experience, and when they go through a spiritual awakening, they regress back to that childlike state of themselves, because that is trauma that is still within their body, still within their avatar, that is asking to be processed. So a lot of the times it may feel as though we are going through a process of, how can I put it? We're going through a process of reconnecting to ourselves. We're going through a process of re-identifying who we are, because the ego is basically simply the conscious mind's perspective of itself. And if we are unaware consciously of some of the issues that we may be dealing with at a subconscious level, it can show up as psychosis and psychotic episodes. For myself personally, when I go into the shadows of myself, I talk to those shadows, I talk to those personalities of myself. I talk myself through those, because I realize that they are different parts of my experience that are fragmented in different dimensions of time. So, for instance, sometimes I'll put it to you like this. Sometimes for certain females, they might find themselves in certain relationships where they continue to devalue themselves. They continue to not necessarily live up to their worth in relationships, or they settle for less, basically. And they don't know why they're doing it. They don't know why it continues to show up. And they would like to be able to gain perspective and gain an understanding as to how they can do differently, how they can make different decisions moving forward. Now, what they don't realize is that there is a part of us within our subconscious mind that is a subpersonality trying to tell us something about ourselves. So, for those people that are living in those types of situations, for those females, for instance, that are living in those types of situations where they're settling for less than they feel that they are worthy of, there's clearly a part of them that doesn't feel worthy of more. Now, when that part of themselves wants to come to the surface to be able to disclose, information and speak on the fact that, okay, my personal experience with fatherlessness is what has taught me that I am not worthy of more. Maybe they did have a father figure that was in their lives, but this person was emotionally unavailable. This person neglected their emotions, didn't assist them with processing their emotions. And subsequently, they're now in a place in their own lives where they continue to perpetuate that cycle. They go for men that are emotionally unavailable to some degree or capacity, or they go for men that are just not in a position themselves to be emotionally available to them. What needs to happen in that space is that your inner child basically is trying to tell you something about your experience, because we all have one. Our inner child is the child within us that is still perpetuating cycles of our childhood experiences. That's why a lot of the times when we are struggling to make certain things happen in our day-to-day manifesting process, we need to be aware of what's going on within our inner child to be able to navigate our way through that. A lot of the times when we go through spiritual awakenings, it is our higher self that is awakening to its true potential. Okay. And when that higher self, which is our higher state of consciousness, the most rational perspective that we can actually attain as a human being at that particular point on our journey, is trying to tell us something about the shadows that may be standing in our way, what will happen is that it's triggering a psychotic episode. It doesn't make us crazy. I do want to again put that across to people. It's just something that we kind of have to go through a process of realizing that crazy is subjective. What you are personally experiencing for yourself may not be what the other person is experiencing. And the things that you are experiencing in your mental space isn't necessarily everybody else's experience outside of you. So you kind of have to take an opportunity to sit with yourself in that moment and validate your own feelings. Because if you're constantly looking for people outside of you to validate your feelings, the sad truth is that you'll be disappointed. We live in a very selfish society, fortunately and unfortunately. I say fortunately because that means that we don't have to continue to perpetuate this cycle of looking to other people to validate our experiences. We can actually take an opportunity to learn how to validate our experiences for ourselves. Now, if we can take an opportunity to do exactly that, where we're sitting with ourselves, where we're validating our experiences, then there's no need for anyone outside of ourselves to come in and address our experiences, because we're completely aware of who we are. A lot of the times when psychotic episodes happen for people, it's because there's parts of themselves, there's parts of their inner child that needs nurturing, that needs to be able to mature, that they are taking the appropriate time to address. And when I say inner child, it's something that I get questioned about a lot. Because we're adults, we assume that this is the only thing that is going on in our conscious mind and in our conscious lives. Well, the reality is that we've had a whole lifetime to get to this adult point in our lifetime. And there are certain experiences that we have had as children that have been traumatic. And we have a child within ourselves that is actually calling out for help. There's certain things that goes on in our childhood that it's important for us to take an opportunity to process. Why? Because unfortunately, if we don't process them, we continue to perpetuate the same cycles. We continue to perpetuate the same experiences over and over and over again, asking ourselves, why does this keep happening to me? Well, the reason why it's happening to you is because in your subconscious mind, there is a sub-personality. There is a child that you have within yourself that has gone through a certain experience, and that child has now formulated a programming, and that programming in your subconscious mind is now a sub personality of your experience. So when that sub personality is trying to awaken you to its experience because you've suppressed it, right? You've shut yourself off from it, because in most cases, when we go through trauma, we eject ourselves, we consciously remove ourselves from the experience. And then when it's time, once the experience is over, we don't process it. We just get on with life because we're told that we need to be strong, we need to be resilient. Well, I want to put out a new perspective of strength. I want to put out a new perspective of what it means to be resilient. What it means to me to live in strength is to be able to sit with that. And as difficult as it may be for you to sit in that shadow and process it, the reality is once you do go through a process of processing it, you no longer have to continue to perpetuate that cycle, because guess what? You would have gone through an experience, for instance, for some people, they go through a lot of females and males. I want to put this across just because of the R. Kelly situation, go through molestation as children, for instance. In those types of circumstances, what happens is that the child, because they aren't able to process, because what we need to really take into consideration as well, a lot of the times when molestation happens for a child, it's usually with people that they trust, it's with adults they trust. And even when it's with strangers, those strangers have to go through a process of grooming that child, making that child feel comfortable enough to be able to be present in the experience of it. And when a person goes through traumatic experiences like those and they eject themselves from the experience, when they do come back into themselves, when they come back into the vessel, it's a case of them really taking an opportunity to understand what actually transpired, what took place in that situation. A lot of the times we don't have the tools to be able to navigate through things like these, which is why consciously we eject ourselves, but subconsciously that is now creating a program. That is creating a program of mistrust. That is creating a program of firewalls, alarm bells. So whenever we feel like we are in similar situations, there will be chemically induced states of beings that will happen. There will be something that will happen in our avatar that will say to us, look, this is dangerous. What do I do in danger? I shut down. And people will just naturally find themselves shutting off in those situations. Now, when a psychotic episode happens, it's a case of them being forced to address those things. When a Kundalini awakening happens, it's a case of people being forced to address the traumas that has not necessarily been addressed, and they haven't processed the emotions, so they don't actually know how they felt in the situation. They don't actually know what the child within them actually feels. That's why we're all considered to be children of God. You know, if we want to sort of take it to a religious context, I think because we get older, because the avatar gets older in age, we forget that we are still children. And for a lot of us, even though we get older, we still feel like 17, we still feel like 15. These are the most, happiest times of our experiences. So we hold on to those parts of ourselves very, very tightly, but we don't go back to the parts of ourselves that were really just living in a state of, I don't understand how to process this experience. If you think about it as well, particularly in today's society, it's because we're taught as well to just, shut off from emotions. We're taught that emotions are a state of weakness. We don't actually know how to process our emotions. And for a lot of children, they're in environments with parents that do not know how to process their emotions. So when a child gets to that place where they are extremely emotional, guess what? The parent gives them what they have, which is to tell that child to stop doing that, shut down. You don't need to do that, grow up. And that's not necessarily fair on the child, because the child is simply asking for an opportunity to understand how to process this experience. The child is asking for an opportunity to understand how to be able to navigate their way through whatever it is that they're feeling right now. If you tell a child no for something that they really want, newsflash, that is traumatizing to a child. It seems like a very, very small thing, but that's traumatizing. And people have to be able to understand that, to be able to give that child an opportunity to navigate their way through it. Now, what happens in a psychotic episode is that the child within you is trying to speak to you. The child within you is trying to let you know that there are certain things that you have not healed from. Sharing my own personal experience with you guys, I went through a psychotic episode, I want to say around about this time last year, if not in December of last year, where I felt a spirit of fear attaching itself to my ego. Now, that's what happens when we go through psychotic episodes. Spirits, which are basically energy forms, energy vibrations, attaches themselves to our ego. Now, when those spirits attach themselves to our ego, it is something that is very, very difficult for another person to explain, because if you're trying to explain it to a person that isn't having your experience, they are convinced that you are crazy. From my own personal experience of a psychotic episode, I was able to consciously navigate my way through it. I called a friend and I said, look, there's a spirit that's attached itself to my ego, and I need your help to help me exorcise this spirit from my vessel. And when we were able to go through the process of an exorcism, for lack of a better way of putting it, we were able to realize that that spirit that was attached to my ego was actually a 4-year-old version of myself that just wanted to be free, that just wanted to be able to live her best life, be a child, and live her best childlike state. But with the adult expectations of us, that child is actually very traumatized by all the expectations and all the requirements to be an adult. And what I personally experienced with that psychotic episode, that's just one, guys, because I go through psychotic episodes every time that, there's an astrological transit that will trigger it. And I want to even touch in on that, guys. Mercury is effectively in retrograde at the minute, and that probably means nothing to you guys. But what it does mean is that Mercury was going steady on its axis, and it was, Mercury is responsible for communication, right? So when Mercury goes back on its axis, it's going back to say, these are some of the things that I need to discuss. These are some of the things that I need to speak about. And when we are in a place of not wanting to speak about those things, when we're in a place of not wanting to acknowledge those things, not wanting to address those things, it can show up as a psychotic episode, because the ego is actually just our conscious mind. It is simply perspective. People speak so much about, oh, you have a big ego, or you're this, or you're that. The ego is simply perspective, guys. And if we can take an opportunity to broaden and expand our perspectives, it will give us an opportunity to grow. It will give that child within us an opportunity to become mature. It will give that child an opportunity to be able to get to a place where it can catch up to our adult experiences of ourselves. I feel like I'm trying to break this down with avoiding the actual depth of the subject. So I'm going to use the words that I best know to express this to you guys. When we go through a spiritual awakening, we are basically tapping into the light and darkness of ourselves. When I speak about the darkness of ourselves, I'm speaking about our traumas that are subsequently considered to be our demons. They are the lower vibrational reflections of us that goes unprocessed. And these lower vibrational reflections of us, our demons, our shadows, are actually parts of ourselves that makes us stronger. A lot of the times people don't want to accept certain parts of themselves because they feel like it makes them a bad person. The spirit of jealousy, for instance, is a necessity. It's a necessary evil. Why? Because that jealousy is going to motivate another person to do more with their lives. Even if you may feel like you're not the type of person to be jealous, there's somebody out there that needs to hate on you so that they can push themselves, so that they can motivate themselves, so that they can actually get to that next stage of their evolution, so that they can get to that goal that they're setting for themselves. They're using their jealousy towards you as a driving force for them to be able to get to a place on their journey. And that is why I say that it is a necessary evil, because without that spirit of jealousy, guess what? That person would literally be stagnant on their journey. So I'm going to say this as well. People have to be careful not to stay in the low vibration of stuff like jealousy, because it serves a purpose until it doesn't serve a purpose any longer. What do I mean by that? So if you are looking outside of yourself and looking at what somebody else has, and you're using that as a motivation for you to aspire to achieve that, once you achieve that, then it's time for you to release your contract with the spirit of jealousy. You no longer need to be envious of what somebody else has, because you've now attained that for yourself. You utilize that as a driving force to be able to get the things that you felt like you didn't have that this person had outside of you. You know, it's not something that has to be seen as a negative, but we're not in a society that is willing to take ownership and say, do you know what, I was actually really jealous about that situation. But what I'm going to use that jealousy to do is give me an opportunity to make better with my situation, so that I don't have to continue to feel jealous about this person. I'm going to get my own. You know, we don't have these open dialogues because we feel like we are bad people, because we judge ourselves. We judge ourselves to a God that is non-judgmental, because from my personal experience, when I go into these shadows of myself and I sit with God and talk my way through these situations, God simply reminds me that he doesn't judge me. This is something that I'm going through. And this is why, it speaks about the fact that we're always forgiven. That's why we can go through a process of redeeming ourselves, because God doesn't judge us. But we have been through the process of organized religion. I have nothing against organized religion. I practice all 7 of the mainstream religions, but I have a personal relationship with God to be able to practice these religions. But because we have been given this depiction of a God that is judgmental of us, we judge ourselves. We judge ourselves hatefully. We judge ourselves without any comfort of really sitting in the shadows of ourselves, because we feel like it makes us bad people. We're not bad people for having negative thoughts. It's really a case of acting on those thoughts in a malicious way. That is, I wouldn't even say that it makes you bad, because I think, again, for me personally, we have to be very careful of the words that we use, because we're casting spells, we're putting words over people's lives. So we have to be very, very careful about the words that we use. But even then, I don't see it as that person being a bad person. I see that as a good person going through a process of learning and coming to realizations about exactly how good they are. But first, in order to understand how good they are, they have to see the negatives of themselves. They have to see the flawed areas of their personality. They have to see their flaws, accept them, and integrate those flaws into their unconditional love of self, instead of us constantly looking outside of ourselves for validation. I'll tell you something, newsflash, guys, someone outside of you cannot love you in the way that you can love yourself, because someone outside of you is getting a certain perception of you based on their personal expectations of you. We live in a world where we're constantly meeting each other's expectations. Only we can get to a place within ourselves where we can actually understand, overstand, and understand what it's like to be in a state of unconditional love. To be in a place of unconditional love is to love thyself. Know thyself and love thyself. It doesn't mean judging yourself for going through certain situations. And a lot of the times as well, because we're so quick to judge ourselves and judge other people in the process, I'll tell you something. The first judgment that you make of a person within the first 30 seconds of meeting that person is something that you don't like about yourself. because the things that we see in other people are the things that we choose not to see in ourselves. And I see people do it all the time. Oh, I don't like this person because I feel like they're narcissistic. Well, I already did a podcast on this. We all have narcissistic traits and tendencies. So really what you're saying about yourself in that situation is that I do not like the fact that I sometimes have narcissistic traits and tendencies. I would like to work on that. But instead of doing that, we are actually projecting the things that we don't like about ourselves and making it other people's problems, making it their issues. And the reality is, whatever issues we have within ourselves, because the world outside of us is simply a mirror reflection of the world within us, those are the types of people that we're going to draw to our experiences, because emotions are magnetic. It's energy in motion. So it's your energy moving through your vibrational setting, calling in people that are a like for like vibrational reflection of you, so that you can experience yourself outside of yourself, because there's parts of yourself within yourself that you choose not to acknowledge, you choose not to be consciously aware of. So when we're going through situations where we're choosing to judge ourselves, we're doing a disservice to ourselves. And this is why psychosis looks like we're crazy to people, because again, this isn't something that we can openly express. This isn't something that we can openly speak about in society. Why? Because the moment that we have these types of conversations, you're getting put into a mental ward. You're going to be put into a situation where they're going to numb the pain. They're going to give you tranquilizers, which literally shuts down your emotions. It shuts down your energy in motion. And what does that do? It suppresses your spiritual awakening. When you could have actually navigated your way through that psychotic episode and get to your superhero form of yourself, because that's what spiritual awakenings do. It allows for you to tap into your unlimited potential of yourself. It's a state of belief that is manifesting itself through you as a vessel. But I think that we have to really first understand what we are when we speak about the human avatar. You know, I think we put ourselves on these pedestals when we think about ourselves being human, and we don't actually know what it means to be a human avatar. You know, we don't understand that we have one vessel processing a world, a universe, in fact, of different emotions, of different cells. We don't realize that every single cell within us actually speaks to and through us. Every single cell. So when you go through a traumatic experience, guess what? There's a cell inside of you that has now formulated a membrane as a vibrational reflection of that trauma. So what's happening when people talk about, oh my God, I was triggered by that experience? What's actually happening is that that experience outside of you is touching in on that cell within yourself that is still a emotional receptor to that experience that you had. I hope that this is making sense, guys. But I really just want to put it across to sort of say that in order to really not make psychosis a taboo subject, we have to be willing to let people go through the episodes of their experiences. We can't numb the pain, because guess what? The pain is going to continue to surface. The pain is going to continue to come up because it's asking to be healed. The trauma is going to come up because it lives within our subconscious mind as a programmed perspective of our experiences. And if we don't take the time to actually process that traumatic situation, we will never know what it's like to be trauma-free of that experience. We'll never know what it's like to actually say, I understand why that situation happened. I know how I created it. I know what thought I used to manifest that experience for myself. Because again, newsflash, we're in a society where we like to blame everybody else for the things that shows up in our experience. If it's something good, we take full ownership of that. We were like, yeah, I did that. You know, you need to give me my props. You need to give me my credit because I worked my butt off to make that happen. Nobody wants to speak about the fact that they also equally created the challenges and obstacles for their experiences through a thought frequency, because thoughts are electric. I spoke about emotions being magnetic. Thoughts are electric. Thoughts are basically sending out these waves into the ethereal realm. They're creating timelines into the ethereal realms for us to be able to navigate our way through. And I know that we live in a society that says that thoughts trigger emotions, but I beg to differ. as someone that is personally connected to my avatar, I sit with myself on a constant trying to gain perspective on the different emotions. And what I find is that it is my emotions that triggers my thought process. So if you're feeling depressed, guess what? You are now having depressive thoughts. It's not that you had a depressive thought that made you feel depression. No, because your emotions, like I mentioned, are magnetic. So they are now cooling down the like for like thought process to connect to that emotions that you're feeling. So when you're going through suicidal thoughts, for instance, that is extreme depression. It is a feeling that you're having within your avatar. And if we can get to a place where people are, openly expressing their experiences, we can actually get to a place where it's not, again, like I said, a taboo subject for us to speak about the fact that we have psychotic episodes. When I went through several of my different psychotic episodes that actually transpired for me, I just went through exorcisms. I had to detach that spirit from my ego, because the ego is simply our perspective. It's our conscious mind. And when we go through a process of doing that, it gives us an opportunity to be able to be free. It gives us an opportunity to be completely aware of who we are in all the greatness of ourselves. And guess what? When we go through the process of our psychotic episodes, we realize that we're actually super bloody human. It's not a far-fetched situation for us to think about, these superheroes. We are the superheroes that we're looking for outside of ourselves, that we think are going to show up and save us. The reality is that they're already here. We have to be willing to tap into our unlimited potential to be able to activate those cells within ourselves. And for me to go a little bit deeper, to touch in on science and not just the spirituality aspect of it, there is 80% of our DNA that is considered to be junk DNA. That is not junk DNA, guys. This is shadow DNA. This is dark DNA. This is dark cells of our DNA. This is unprocessed emotions, unprocessed DNA that has been passed down to us through our genetic buildup. It has been passed down to us through our genetic makeup. So if we don't know what the 80% of our junk DNA is, we'll never be able to get to a place where we're living in the full potential of ourselves. Why? Because when we go into triggering those DNA, when we go into activating those DNA, that junk DNA as we consider it, we go through psychotic episodes. That's just what it shows up as. That's what it looks like for us. It doesn't mean that we are crazy. It simply means that we have one avatar to do a million different things. And I think we take for granted how much the human avatar does, how difficult it is to actually do this human thing, how difficult it is to actually, live in this avatar and give ourselves an opportunity to really just live up to the biggest and best of our potential. It's so often that we just sit and tell ourselves a story. And unfortunately, it just kind of cut out for a moment. But yeah, I think we have to kind of be mindfully aware about what we are telling ourselves as far as the stories of our experiences, because our experiences are making us more aware of who we are. Our experiences are making us more aware of where we have been. And in order to know who we are, we have to know where we've been, to know where we're going, to make a conscious decision to know where we're going. But a lot of the times, like I say, we're so quick to accept all the positives of our experiences and not so willing to embrace some of the negatives. And again, I don't necessarily look at any aspect of the journey as a negative. It is simply a blessing in disguise. It was something that was a stepping stone into our success. There's no such thing as failure. There is only stepping stone into your success. And the only way for you to be more successful is to learn what are some of the unsuccessful things that may sort of show up as you navigate through the process of becoming successful. So when we're talking about psychotic episodes, again, I just really have to put across that there are people out there that goes through mental struggles every single day. And we need to be a society that is showing compassion for these people. We need to be a society that is not placing judgments on these people, giving them the opportunity to experience themselves, giving them the opportunity to really experience the fullness of their avatar. Because like I say, we have one avatar to do a million different things, but we take the avatar for granted. We take the human vessel for granted because we think that it's normal. We think that it's normal for us to do the things that we do on a every single day basis, but it's not normal. It's not normal. It just becomes normalized to us through repetition. It becomes habitual through repetition. And we have to understand that some people may struggle with working their avatar from time to time. And that's okay. What we need to be doing is encouraging these people and letting them know that they do have a support. Instead of as soon as they go through something that is a struggle for them, we're going to put them in a mental institution and we're going to numb them. We're going to shut them off from their feelings and we're going to shut them down to their superhuman abilities. That's what transpires in most of these situations. When someone goes through a spiritual awakening, I mentioned that Mercury, there are certain planetary alignments that may trigger a spiritual awakening for people. There are certain planetary transits that will trigger spiritual awakening for people. And because we're not in a society where we are educated about these things, because we're not in a society where we sit and take a time to really have open, honest, and frank conversations about ourselves. People ask us all the time, oh, how are you doing today? A lot of these people aren't really asking with a genuine desire to know how you're doing today. It's just a surface question so that they could just kind of, how can I put it? It's like small talk, basically, for someone to ask you how you're doing. The difference to know that it wasn't a surface ask is when your heart speaks to that person. If your heart directly speaks to that person, there's things that you're holding on to in your heart, and someone comes to you and they ask you, how are you doing today? And they're asking you from the kindness, genuinely the kindness of their heart, because they want to know. Your heart is going to pour out to them. Your heart is going to start to express itself to them. Your heart is going to start speaking to them. But if there are people that are coming into your experience to just have a surface conversation with you for the sake of small talk, and likewise, equally for yourself as well, if you do not take the time to sit with yourself, to sit with your avatar, when I say your avatar, I mean your human body, because I think we get so attached to the avatar, we actually perceive it to be who we are, when it is simply a vessel for us to navigate through this human experience of ourselves. And I think we forget that. We speak a lot of the time about, you see all over social media, I'm a spiritual being having a human experience. Well, can we actually have that human experience by acknowledging that we are in a human avatar having this human experience? And it is difficult, it is hard, and there are certain things that goes on in the psyche of a human avatar that is very challenging to navigate through. When we're going through a spiritual awakening, when we talk about, psychologically, things are imbalanced. We're talking about the crown chakra. We're talking about difficulties with self-realizations. And I mentioned earlier on in the discussion about Kundalini awakening and the life force energy that lies dormant at the base of the spine in between the root chakra and the sacral chakra. When that life force energy is triggered and it goes all the way up your spine and all the way back down your spine, it is triggering all of your chakras, and it's giving you an opportunity to become self-realized. And when you become self-realized, guess what? You have to go into your subconscious mind. You have to get consciously aware of what's going on at the subconscious levels and layers of yourselves. This is what happens when we go through a spiritual awakening. This is what happens when we go through a Kundalini awakening. And these things, like I mentioned, are triggered by certain planetary aspects, like, for instance, Mercury retrograde, because Mercury is teaching us how to be better communicators. And in order to be better communicators externally, we have to be better communicators internally. The best way that I can even sort of express it to you guys, thinking about it now, there is an animation called Inside Out. that is probably the closest thing that I can utilize to give you guys an insight into really understanding what it's like living in this human avatar. Because we normalize certain things out of habit and assume that it is normal because we have become habitual in doing those things. Just because we get up every day and make breakfast, get ourselves washed, get ourselves clean, do things on a day-to-day basis does not mean that it is normal. It is a habit. It is a routine. It is a regime. When people go through depression, for instance, they are not living in the routine of that. They are not living in the habit of that because of where their emotional vibrations are at that point of their experience. And there's nothing wrong with that. I want to put this across. Psychosis is basically what happens when demons attach themselves to our egos. And I just want to be completely blunt in this space. When I talk about demons, I'm talking about low vibrational entities outside of ourselves. I'm talking about energetic forces. I'm not talking about these monsters that we see in the media, that we see on TV. I'm talking about demons that we carry within ourselves. And I think because there's this propaganda outside of us, I think that because the media puts on this image of what demons are and gives us these fear-based perspectives of what demons are, this is why we choose not to actually acknowledge the demons that we carry within ourselves, because demons aren't anything outside of us, guys. Demons are actually things that are within us. Demons are the unprocessed emotions of our traumas that we carry around within us every single day. And guess what? There is going to be a planetary alignment, like, for instance, Mercury retrograde, where people are going to cast their demons out at other people because these are things that they choose not to accept about themselves. And for a lot of people that experience psychotic episodes, they will hear voices. They hear voices in their mind. But guess what? A lot of those voices are parts of yourself. We are literally channels. We are radios, guys. And we pick up, we tune in to different people's channels. We tune into different people through our experiences of them. And I think because we've put ourselves, like I said, on these pedestals, we don't actually have an understanding of how we are tuning into these different radio frequencies. There are people that have interactions with extraterrestrial beings, for instance. And that is completely normal. Why? Because they are an open channel. Why? Because they are an open receptor. For people that go through psychotic episodes, they are now becoming open. They're going through a Kundalini awakening, and their spirit is becoming open. And as their spirit becomes open, they are now consciously aware of the shadow spirits that they have within themselves and the contracts that they have with these spirits within themselves. And that is the entire purpose of a spiritual awakening. And that's why a spiritual awakening will manifest as a psychotic episode, because spirits are attaching themselves to you. And for a lot of these people, they are dark forces. And again, when I say dark forces, it's like the yin yang, guys, because people are so quick to put these stigmas on things. It's the necessary evil of the world. Without the darkness, we'll never know how bright our lights can shine. And without the light, the darkness will never know that it can be light. We have to really take these things and put them into perspective for ourselves versus continuing to listen to a propaganda outside of ourselves, continuing to look at propaganda in the media in terms of other people's beliefs, in terms of other people's perspectives. We have to sit with ourselves. I'm telling you, there are people. So we go through spiritual awakenings. For a female, you go through a spiritual awakening between the age of 21 and 22. For males, you are a little bit, maybe about 1,000 days behind on your journey, because you go through your spiritual awakening between the age of 25 and 27. Okay. Those are like your big significant spiritual awakenings as your adult self. Prior to that, we have different aspects of our spiritual awakening. You have to think about it. As you go into different stages of your life, you go into different spiritual awakenings, guys. So perfect example, actually, using somebody in the media. Kanye West went on a spiritual awakening where people were saying that he was crazy and he was going through all of these different things, and now he's in a place where he's actually got a much closer relationship to God. He's tapped into his Christ consciousness state of his being. He's tapped into his inner God within himself, his inner good over darkness spirit within himself, and he's using that force, he's utilizing that life force to be able to navigate through the rest of his journey. But there were a lot of people that were saying that he was crazy when he was going through what he was going through. And I remember for myself, I was like, this is amazing to see that he's going through a spiritual awakening in the public eye. I know that the public is looking at this man like he's crazy because of the things that he's saying, but he is simply tapping into source. He's tapping into the oneness of creation, like we all do. Where do we think that our thoughts come from? I think that we're so dense being in this 3D vessel, in this 3D avatar, in this 3D experience of ourselves. Like I said, we are convinced that the human body is really us. And the reality, like I keep saying, is that we are spiritual beings having this human experience. So can we just do that? Can we really just own the fact that we are spiritually intellectual enough to be able to be in this human avatar? We need to be having open dialogues. We need to be having open discussions about our human experiences of ourselves to avoid things and triggers like psychotic episodes and psychosis. Because all psychosis really is a spiritual awakening. That person is awakening to the true essence of their spirit within this avatar. I wouldn't say trapped, I would say contained within this avatar, because within the confinements of this avatar, we have, I would say, certain limitations. We are definitely limitless beings, but within the avatar, because the avatar is a linear being, it has to go through a process of time-based concepts. It has to go through a process of manifesting second by second, minute by minute, hour by hour. You get the point, you get the gist, you know. But because we're going through these things and we're not educating ourselves and we're not educating our children, can I just say, about these things, they go through the exact same process of exactly the same things that we go through. Psychotic episodes that we don't speak about. I'll tell you something. There are probably people that go through several psychotic episodes throughout a day and they don't even realize it. Why? Because there are different waves, there are different extremities of psychotic episodes. There are some people that has really big psychotic episodes, and then bam, we're going to put them in a mental institution, numb their pain, numb the process of their awakening, and they don't get to activate their superhuman potential. Again, utilizing Kanye West as an example, because he was able to go through his awakening, he was able to get to the other side, connect to God, connect to Christ consciousness, and really live in the true nature of his self. Newsflash, guys, psychosis is not a crazy experience. It is a normal experience. It is something that should be normalized. It is something that we should openly be having open dialogue on, because if it can be something that is, you know, normalized in today's society, then we can all get to that place where we are having open discussions. We can all get to that place where we are openly discussing about the fact that, okay, I had a thought today and I had to talk to that thought because that didn't even seem like my thought. The reality is there is one creator and we are all tapped into the same source consciousness. And sometimes we may get thoughts that aren't necessarily ours that will intercept in our frequency, because we are radios. The avatar is an empath. I hear people say all the time, oh, I'm an empath. And I keep getting myself into these situations. No, we are all empaths. If you have a human avatar, you are an empath. That is the reality, because the human avatar is actually the empath. It is interpreting information. It is interpreting the energies that are going on around us through our auras, through our chakras, and it is trying to make a perspective. That's what the ego is. The ego is perspective. The ego, basically, as we process the information of the energies that we are actually navigating our way through, the ego then processes that and we gain a perspective. That's why a lot of the times it feels like, oh my God, I can't deal with this person because their ego is so big. No, they have a different perspective to you, and it's difficult for them to come out of their perspective and engage with you in your perspective. That's all the situation is. But again, we do not live in a society where we take the time to have these open dialogues, where we take the time to really engage in these things. And it's a sad situation for us, unfortunately, because there are so many people that are being misdiagnosed. And also, you have to bear in mind, when we're going into these mental institutions and mental hospitals, there's a pharmaceutical industry that is benefiting from that. The pharmaceutical industry, and I really have to touch in on this because I feel like there's a part of me that was reluctant to speak on this, but I really have to go there. The pharmaceutical, for every person that goes through a psychotic episode that is referred to a mental institution, the pharmaceutical industry benefits from that, which is why we are not being educated about how to navigate through a psychotic episode. Instead, what we are doing is getting medicated to treat the symptoms instead of being educated to prevent the actual cause of the experiences. These are some of the things that we really need to consider. I'm going to repeat that again. When we go into situations where we go through psychotic episodes and we go into mental institutions, we are continuing to perpetuate a cycle of feeding the pharmaceutical industry that is invested in us continuing to be medicated to treat the symptom instead of being educated to treat the cause. And those are two completely different things. When a person is going through a psychotic episode, they are open channels, they are open portals, they are open waves that they are tapping into, because the human avatar, I don't know how else to put it, the human avatar is just a radio. It's a radio that taps into different frequencies. It's a radio that taps into different channels. That's why I say that the human avatar is the empath, which means that technically we are all empaths. This is why children can pick up on disdain when their parents are going through something, because their avatar is saying to them, okay, mommy or daddy is feeling this type of way today. And then their ego is going to be able to process that. Their ego is going to be able to interpret that as an experience. But again, because we're not taking the opportunity to really sort of sit with ourselves, sit with our avatar, understand, overstand, and understand what's actually really going on with us at the root cause of these situations, we're not able to navigate our way through these spiritual awakenings. And what we're doing is shutting ourselves off from our superhuman potential, from our superhuman abilities. And if we can actually navigate our way through these conscious states of being, we can actually tap into a Christ state of consciousness. I want to take it even back to scripture, for instance, like the being, the avatar that was considered to be Jesus Christ. If you go by Islam, it speaks about Jesus Christ being Prophet Isa. That was a being that was able to tap into their Christ state consciousness. They were able to be and go beyond this physical 3D realm and understand what they are, understand the experience that they are having as this spirit contained within this human avatar that is interpreting their journey of their spirit in a particular lifetime. And again, if we can understand that there are certain aspects of our natal charts, because I do astrology as well, there's certain aspects of our natal charts that will determine when we go through certain spiritual awakenings. 33 is a difficult year for anyone. I was going to say I don't care what anybody has to say, but I actually don't. 33 is a difficult year. Why? Because that is the number of Christ consciousness. The universe speaks through numerology. The universe knows and understands numbers. That is the universe's language. So if we are consciously aware of that, we know that by the time we get to 33, we're going to be going through something significant. We're going to be going through something extremely big in terms of our awakening process, to give us an opportunity to go deeper within ourselves, to tap deeper within our Christ consciousness state of being. And what does it mean to be Christ conscious? It means that you are self-realized. You know thyself. You know the limitless, endless, boundless realms of your potential. You know that this 3D realm is not something that can limit what you are capable of. Yes, it is a process of the avatar having to go through manifestation at a linear concept, because the avatar works on a time-based perspective. So it's second by second, minute by minute, hour by hour. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that you're limited. It simply means that you have to stay focused on what you are manifesting so that it can come into full manifestation, come into fruition. When we're talking about psychotic episodes, guys, all we're talking about is the fact that people are going through, navigating through the shadows of their light. They're going through a process of spiritual attacks, for lack of a better way of putting it. And some of those spiritual attacks are spirits that they have contracts with, spirits of grief that we don't process, that if goes on process will activate our cancer cells. Again, something that they do not speak to us about. Depression, for instance, and anxiety, for instance, that can manifest in a female as fibroids, as cysts on a woman's womb, if she does not process the emotion of depression that she is carrying within herself. Again, if we understand what the human avatar is, we can become so great. We can become so boundless in our ability to really create. I just want to like really put it out there and say psychosis is a myth, okay? Like there may be people that will disagree with that because of their own psychotic episodes, but honestly, beloved, take ownership for your experience. The reality is you have contracts with certain low vibrational reflections and entities, certain dark spirits, basically, that are manifesting through you. A lot of the times, some people do actually go through a process of being spiritually attacked because people cast dark spirits and dark shadows at them. So basically, it's almost like when people say, "Oh, I'm being attacked by a demon," or "I'm being attacked by a shadow." Sometimes there are things like that that does happen as well. And there are people, the only way that an entity can attach itself to a person is for that person to actually let that entity in. Like I said, we are radio channels. Like we just tap into different dimensions, we tap into different frequencies as far as stations, and those stations become our permanent or temporary experiences. And if we aren't consciously aware of these things, we will just continue to go around feeling powerless to the experience that we're having. Even if somebody was to basically cast a spirit at someone and they find themselves, you hear it a lot of the times where people say that I've been possessed, basically, because a lot of the times when people go through psychosis, it does look like a possession, right? It is because they already have contracts with those types of entities. Let me even put across what I mean when I say an entity. Emotions are entities. Joy is a spirit. Okay, sadness is a spirit. Desperation is a spirit. Happiness is a spirit. These are literally, when we talk about spirits, what we mean is energy. Energy is spirit. Energy is an experience of a vibration that we can tap into. But if we aren't aware of what thought process we've used to navigate our way into these experiences of ourselves, we just do not want to take any accountability. And accountability is key. This is how I've been able to go through several psychotic episodes, as they call it, by really understanding what spirits I have contracts with, seeing the different vibrations of myself, because the inner child within all of us, because we're all children of God, the inner child within us is trying to tell us something about our childhood experiences. And when we go through a spiritual awakening, we have to go through a process of addressing those things for us to become aware of those aspects of our experience and how it is manifesting through us as a result of that. What I do want to put across why I say that psychosis is a myth is because we're not having psychotic episodes, guys. We're going through spiritual awakenings. There's a difference. We have to be very careful about the words that we use, because somebody diagnosing someone to say that they have a psychotic episode or they're going through psychosis, guess what? Again, these are labels that have been given to us by the pharmaceutical industry so that they can continue to medicate the symptom instead of educate us to navigate our way through the cause. Okay. And we live in a society where the pharmaceutical industry, there is no financial abundance for the pharmaceutical industry in us being free from our pain. Why? Because then they're cut off their supply. We are their supply. And as long as we continue to be sick mentally, as long as we continue to be sick spiritually, as long as we continue to be sick emotionally, they will continue to thrive. They will continue to make money off us. They will continue to keep us uneducated about what we are. They will continue to keep us uneducated about how to help ourselves, uneducated about how to help our children, uneducated about how to help the generations before us and the generations beyond us. When a person is going into dementia, for instance, they are going into another dimension of their human experience. They're going into another phase of life. We're not being educated on these things. So when we see someone going through psychosis, we're like, oh my God, like they just had a psychotic episode. Somebody that's bipolar, for instance, oh my God. And I have this all the time where people are like, oh, I have bipolar tendencies. Guess what? We're all a little bit bipolar. Why? Because we have a child within us that is unhappy with its experiences, and the adult version of us is trying to interpret that. That's why it shows up as bipolar disorder. It isn't, again, these are the labels that the pharmaceutical industry is giving us so that they can continue. Dementia is not an experience. Beg to differ, beg to differ. It is an experience into another reality. It is an experience into the reality that is beyond life in the 3D. So when people are going through dementia, for instance, their avatar is going through, how can I put it? Their avatar is going through a process of not being consciously aware of where they are in the present moment. Their avatar is going in and out of different dimensions of time. That's really all that's taking place when people go through a process of dementia. And it has a lot to do with where they are in the stage and phase of their human experience. They are tapping into different parts and transitions of time, of life in itself. And that's why in most cases dementia will happen when people get to a certain stage of life, because they are going through another spiritual awakening. We don't ever just go through one spiritual awakening. To go from basically, when we go into double digits, for instance, even we go through a spiritual awakening even then, because we're moving from 9 into 10. When we become a teenager, we go through a spiritual awakening. For females, it manifests as the body changes, as well as for males, the body changes. We go through a process of several spiritual awakenings throughout our lifetime, but we're not in a place where we're being educated about these awakenings, because there is no money in us curing ourselves. And the reality is, if we become consciously aware of how we are traveling into these different pockets of space, because that's what it is, different dimensions of space. Time is a concept for us to be able to perceive our experience. The reality is there's only space, and time is simply degrees of dimensions of space. And if we are able to be consciously aware of how we're navigating through these things, we can actually thrive in our experiences. But we live in a society that does not want to see the collective thrive, because they want the minority, they want a small amount of people to continue to thrive, and they want to be in that number that is taking dominion of us. And they continue to feed us things, they continue to feed us lies through their propaganda in the media. They continue, if a person, I'd love to have that eureka moments. Well, you're the first. You can actually, Sean, you can actually go through a process. My guardian angel is actually called Sean, so that's interesting. But you can go through a process of activating your Kundalini through meditation. There's a meditation process that you can do that will allow you to unlock your. I'll give you my. I'll pop in a link here, and you can sort of connect with my stuff so that you can, really gain some insight and perspective. But Kundalini awakening will basically treat that stuff. But I do want to say, be careful what you wish for, because when you go through a spiritual awakening, you basically tap into the subconscious mind. You tap into layers of ourselves that we have been unconsciously aware of for a significant period of time. And we have to go through the inner child to be able to mature that inner child within ourselves so that we can become mature adults. And that's why a lot of the times when people kind of go through processes of their spiritual awakenings, you see them regress into their childlike states of themselves, because that is what's happening. We're actually just children. We're actually just children. We just get older. And then because they've given us these adult rules that we have to abide by, we lose that sense of self. We lose connection with that child within ourselves, and we shut ourselves off from that inner child within ourselves. And when we go through spiritual awakening, it's really that child within us that is calling out, that is crying out, that is saying, I went through this experience and it was traumatic for me. I went through that experience and it has shaped me. It has conditioned me. It has made me into someone that I do not even know. A lot of us know who we are as adults, but so many of us have no clue who we are as children, because we're disconnected from that child within ourselves. Because it's easier for us to continue along the journey and tell ourselves that, we just kind of have to get on with things. I'm 39 and I still think I want. Well, see, this is the thing. It's great to be able to stay in that childlike state of ourselves, because there's one thing being childlike and there's another thing being childish. When we go through regressing, that's when we go through being childish. But when we are in our childlike state of ourselves, we are really living in our best reflections of ourselves. We're not taking life too seriously, because it really isn't that serious. But we live in a society that really does want to take everything seriously. That's why we're snowed under with all these adult expectations of ourselves. That's why we're snowed under with all of these adult formulas that we have to abide by to be able to feel like this is what success looks like. We have to determine what success looks like for ourselves. We have to determine what it means to actually be an adult for ourselves, so that we don't become a puppet, so that we don't become a version of ourselves based on society's expectations of us, because it is a very traumatic experience for that child within ourselves. This is why we become sad. This is why we become depressed. This is why we don't know why we're unhappy. We can feel the unhappiness inside of us, but it's like, I have so many things going for me. I have my house, I have my family, I have my car, I have this, all of these adult expectations that the world outside of you has given you. You've met those expectations, but inside of you, you're still sad. Why? Because the child inside of you is not being met. It's not being catered to. It's not being nurtured. And when you go through a spiritual awakening, that child will then be able to sort of remind you about its experiences and let you know that this is where I need healing, beloved. This is where I need you to look after me. This is where I need you to take care of me. Why? Because as great as a job that our parents do, or like there are for some, and even if our parents fall short in certain areas, that is a part of our journey. Why do I say that? Because our astrological natal charts will predetermine the kind of experience that we have here. And some of us came here to have certain parents. I know what you are saying, but you have to think of others around you. Absolutely. Absolutely. And there was a point in my experience where I was thinking about others around me. And again, that made my child sad. Why? Not because my child wanted me to be selfish. I learned that I had to be self-full. When you're selfish, you're only, again, tapping into one aspect of yourself. You are now allowing for the conditions of the things that you have been through to basically shape you and mold you into a selfish characteristic that you're now putting out there into the world. What my child within myself, through several different, dialogues and conversations, taught me is that I need to be self-full. I need to be able to acknowledge my truth as well as give the people around me the freedom to be able to acknowledge their own truth as well. I used to be, in a place in my own experience where I'm like, don't you see this? Why don't you see this? But then I sat with God and God said to me, where you are on your journey isn't necessarily where somebody else is at on their journey. And I had to honor that. God said to me that it's important that I honor that, because otherwise I will never get an opportunity to meet this person where they're at. I will never get an opportunity to be compassionate, to empathize with this person where they're at. So I definitely do empathize with others, but I try not to think of others. What do I mean by that? So when we think of others, sometimes we suppress our own personal desires because we're putting other people's feelings before our own because of misplaced loyalty. And that was a very, very tough lesson for me to learn. I let go of several relationships as I learned how to be loyal to myself through the process of going through that lesson. What I learned to do was empathize with others, instead of thinking of others. So when I empathize with others, I empathize in understanding that they are at a certain place on their journey. They're at a certain place on their awakening, on their self-realizations, on their realization of self, of who they are as this spiritual being having this human experience of themselves. Isn't there a danger of the inner child taking over? Well, the inner child should, I wouldn't say shouldn't take over, but it should be a team effort. It can be very, very dangerous. And that's what psychosis is. That's what psychotic episodes are. That's when the inner child takes over. The inner child is now taking over the vessel because it's not happy with the way that we're doing things as the adult representative of its experience, right? So when we can work together, that's why it's important to be able to have those conversations with ourselves. I know people say, oh, talking to yourself is crazy. I tell you something. We talk to so many people on a day-to-day basis. It would be crazy not to talk to ourselves. Why? Because as we have those conversations with other people throughout our day-to-day experiences, they are planting seeds within our subconscious mind, and they are creating sub-personalities that becomes puppets meeting their expectations. So it's important for us to have conversations. If I speak to 5 people for the day, I need to have 5 different conversations with myself for that day. Why? Because I need to be aware of who I am. We're not aware that we are shaping and molding each other as we interact with each other. So talking to ourselves is very, very important. Talking to the child within ourselves is very, very important. Sometimes when we go through depression, it's not the adult version of us that's depressed. It's because the child within us is sad about something. Sometimes when we go through the spirit of rebellionism, we feel like, oh, I don't want to be told what to do. That isn't the adult you. That is a child within you that is probably trying to deal with the fact that it may have had very strict and structured foundations growing up, upbringing wise, and it's trying to rebel. But if we don't take the time to really have these conversations with ourselves, when I when I meet the spirit of rebellionism within myself, I talk myself through that. I rationalize with that child within myself and let that child know this is what we need to do. It does come across wrong to talk to yourself, but I do it. Great job, Sean. It's important to talk to ourselves, because if we don't talk to ourselves, we lose sight of who we are. We literally are so busy meeting everybody else's expectations, it gets to a place where we don't even know what our own personal expectations are. And that becomes a very, very, very sad world for us to live in. So for me, when I think about psychosis, I think about the fact that the inner child is triggered when we go through a spiritual awakening, and that child takes over the vessel because we have suppressed it for the entire adult lifetime. We haven't gone back to process its pain and trauma and feelings. And it wants to let us know that it's still a part of our experience. We are simply the adult representative of the child within us. And I think a lot of the times we forget that, or we take it for granted, and we think that, it's something negative to be childlike. It's very, very important to keep connected to the child within ourselves. It's important to be childlike every so often. Why? Because the child gets depressed with this adult representation that we have been given as far as the expectations of an adult. So the next time that you are having a thought that is perhaps against the natural nature, or what feels like the natural nature of yourself, talk yourself through that thought. Why? Because that thought is coming up to teach you something about yourself. It is coming up to surface. And that thought is actually being triggered by the astrological alignments. I mentioned that Mercury's in retrograde. People are going to be triggered by this transit. People are going to be projecting their demons, aspects of their reality that they choose not to accept about themselves, their flaws that they choose not to accept about themselves. And we're going to go through a little bit of a challenging time because people don't know how to communicate their pain. We don't know how to be vulnerable in today's society. It's a sad, sad truth, but we live in a society as well that has a lot of vultures. So I do understand why we don't know how to be vulnerable in today's society as well, which is why we have to learn how to safeguard ourselves. We have to learn how to protect ourselves. And the only way to do that, the only way that we learn is to learn what not to do, unfortunately, in this human experience. Because our higher selves knows what to do, but in order for our higher selves, our spiritual nature of ourselves, to teach us what not to do, that's how we'll be able to learn from that experience as a human. And we have to be able to honor that entire aspect of the situation, because those are the things that we'll grow from. Nothing is ever actually a lesson. It is simply a blessing in disguise. We are being shown something. We are being taught something. So it's still a blessing. It's just not a blessing for us, or at least it doesn't feel like a blessing for us in that very moment. There will be maybe 2 months, 3, 4, 5 months from now where it shows up and it's like, okay, I get this. So antidepressants medication is a pharmaceutical company making money. I get that. We can work on ourselves to control. Absolutely, Sean. That I have gone through even recently this weekend just gone. I navigated my way through the spirit of depression, because that's what these emotions are. They're spirits. They're spirits that we carry within ourselves, that we carry within the avatar. Depression taught me what I needed to know. It taught me why I was depressed. And when we are depressed, it literally is just us being compressed. It's us being or feeling as though we are being pressured. It's like when we're in the pressure stages of being made into a diamond. I'm sure that, when the diamond is being pressured, it feels like it's going through depression, but it's because we are resistant to certain aspects of our reality that is taking place for us. We are looking at it like it's happening to us, and we're not able to live in gratitude of the experience. And that is why it feels like depression for us in those situations. So when I sat with depression recently, what it taught me was that I wasn't happy with this circumstance that was showing up in my life. I wasn't happy with that circumstance. And then I sat with myself and I said, what can I do to make myself no, I've never taken antidepressants. I've never taken antidepressants. I don't need to. I talk myself through everything that I go through. I talk to my guides. I utilize my angels. I have a very good relationship with God. I talk to God every single time I go into a low vibrational reflection of myself. And again, God can be anything for anyone, guys. Whatever it is for you guys, the universe, Allah, whatever it is to you guys, that is, your vice for your healing. Use anything, absolutely, whatever works for you, because what works for me isn't going to work for the next person. This is just how I learned to attune my avatar. This is how I learned to get my avatar back into a state of high vibrational frequency so that I can experience a higher vibrational spirit reflection of myself. But whatever works for a person is what works for them. I do meditation on a daily basis. I'm actually a guided meditation facilitator. So that helps as well. This is how I was able to even get to a place where I have open dialogue with my child, because I was able to clear the fog of everybody else's seeds that they've planted within my subconscious mind to get to that girl. And when I did get to my child the very first time, she was very fragile. She looked feral. She had been through so much in life, and I had to be the one to pick her up and try to merge the broken, fragmented pieces of her back together, because I had neglected her, just like how she felt like the world outside of me had neglected her. And these are some of the things that we really need to sort of be having conversations about. I'll tell you what an antidepressant is going to do for a person. It is going to numb their pain, and they will never learn the tools that they have within themselves to be able to navigate through that low vibrational reflection of that spirit. That's what depressions will do, antidepressants will do, because it is taking you away from what you are feeling, and what you are feeling is indicative of how you are perceiving your experience. And if you're perceiving your experience in a certain way, you need to be able to learn how to, shift your perspective. You need to be able to learn how to look at it through different lenses. And in order to do that, you actually have to put on different spectacles. You have to put on different glasses. And in order to know what glasses you need, you have to go through a process of understanding what tools you have. So I say all that to say that psychosis and psychotic episodes are simply spiritual forces interacting with our ego, which is basically just our perspective, our viewpoints at the world that we're experiencing. I am doing this again, Sean. I've really enjoyed sort of like having you sit into the space, and your interactivity has been awesome. Actually, you've really put certain questions and highlighted certain things out there, which has been awesome. I am going to be live again, probably next Tuesday, where I'll select another topic to choose from. I'll let I'll let the universe guide me on what topic needs to be spoken about, so that we can really just get the dialogue open and spoken openly about these things, because nobody is crazy. They're just having a different experience to what we're experiencing in our own reality, and everybody has a right to do so. Everybody has a right to their own experience, because they have free will. And it's important for us to honor everyone's experiences, even a child. A lot of the times people don't want to ask that child anything. They just want to tell the child everything, and it's like, I've learned some of my best lessons from children. Why? Because they haven't been conditioned by the world that we live in just yet. So they are so much more pure and innocent in their perspective of life. And we have to just honor each other's experiences. That's what it means to empathize with a person. Honoring their experience will give you an opportunity. Well, take care. Hopefully, I'll get to hear you. Thank you, Sean. You take care. Hopefully, we will be able to touch in again on Tuesday, but it has been awesome to sort of have you guys touch in and stop into the space. Thank you to everybody else that's here. I see Sarah, Nikki. Just thank you guys for sort of stopping into the space, because we've got like the last couple of minutes before we do close out. But honestly, guys, it really is just an opportunity for us to be able to own ourselves, own our experience, honor our entire experience, and just live our best lives, man. That's what we came here to do. There's so many spirits out there, because I'm an psychic, I'm an intuitive. There are so many spirits out there that would really just love to have a human avatar again. There's so many things that they'd like to do differently from the things that they've learned. And there's so many of us here that are just not living it to the fullest. Absolutely, Sean, 100%. Just live it. Just live your life. Don't stay stuck in your mind, because that's what happens when we go through psychotic episodes. We are stuck in our minds, and then we get dragged down by the densities of certain thoughts that are being triggered by certain emotions that we are feeling. But because we're not honoring our experiences, and we don't feel comfortable with being vulnerable enough, we can't just say, do you know what, I'm just not having a great day today, but I'm going to work through it. And it's very, very, very important for us to be able to do so. I do shadow working with people, guys. So if that's something that you guys are interested in, all of these things that I've spoken about, I help people see into their subconscious mind, to see the spirits, I guess, of themselves that are creating certain aspects of their reality, that are creating certain physical manifestations of certain emotions that they're carrying within themselves, certain traumas that they haven't processed. If that's something that you guys are interested in, I'm going to put again my link in the bio. There's like so many other different channels that I have as well, social media channels that you can connect with me on. And you guys can just literally tune into the space, see what is and isn't for you guys. But just honestly, don't forget who you are. That is my final parting message to you guys. Know thyself, love thyself, accept thyself, be thyself to the fullest of your capabilities, because you are unique and God made only one of you because there was only one of you necessary to be created. And your journey is unique because you are here as a singular reflection of God that needed to be experienced through your vessel.